Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi, Filipp. How are you today?
Hi, Julia. I'm doing great.
I'm really excited to have you on my podcast today. We've been planning this for a little while. And tell us where you are right now. This is always a question where I start with. So tell us a little bit more about, where are you at? What have you been up to today?
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm currently at my house in Redwood City, California. It is 3:54 p.m. California time. And today I actually did a home project, which is something I don't usually do. But I painted a set of bookshelves that I had installed. So feeling good about that. Took a while, but always good to do something with your hands.
Yeah. Is that one of your stress management tools?
It can be. I actually, I enjoy doing things that take time and not rushing them. So.
Any other projects that you have going on that you think of when you think about like doing things with your hands?
I've started, I do a few things. I started working with wood. So I cut and make signs. And that's been good because keeps your concentration. When you're working with the saw, you can't get distracted. I think woodwork has been good for me, and it kind of helps kind of focus and take your mind off of things.
Yeah, great, nice. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. So for people that are meeting you for the first time, who are you and what have you been up to? Maybe who was Filipp 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago? Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. So I'll give you a high-level overview. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity to get into detail, but overall, grew up in Ukraine, born and spent the first 14, 15 years of my life there. And then immigrated with my family to San Diego, California. So high school, sophomore through senior year was in San Diego. Then moved up to the Bay Area, went to college at Berkeley, which is where I met my future wife. Been married for 14 years. Have 3 beautiful children. Lived on both coasts of the United States, lived in California, lived in Boston, in Massachusetts, and in Connecticut. My wife is a physician, so we went East Coast for her training and my business school. Professionally, I did consulting and sales strategy and operations at Google, which is where I currently work. And lastly, I'm also a bereaved father. My middle child, Gitel, died a little over 3 years ago in a car accident. So that's been devastating. And it's a journey I'm on. So that's kind of a little bit about myself.
Thank you for sharing that. And how old are your kids, the other 2?
So Michael is 10 and Rose is 14 months. So.
Nice. That's great. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about forgiveness today. I remember meeting you for the first time when we found out what happened. And obviously it's this extremely sad thing that happened. And I was talking with you and we were all very, all of the colleagues that heard about the accident were devastated and couldn't believe what had happened. But more so for just like the outsiders, but, for the family of like, how do you deal with something like that, with such a big loss? And you told me, I remember very well about a book that you were reading at the time and that you actually gave to me as well. You gave me a copy of the book to talk and tell me a little bit more about why forgiveness is so important in our life.
Yeah. Yeah, and that book made a huge difference. The title is Forgive for Good by Fred Luskin. Interestingly enough, I read the book maybe 4 or 5 months before the accident, and was thinking about forgiveness even before then. And so the question of why forgiveness is important for me, it became an important thing to think about because I found myself carrying quite a bit of weight without even realizing it, like mental weight. And I would just be thinking about things that happened in the past, and they would be weighing me down. Family relationships, things that happened a long time ago. I couldn't change them anymore. But for some reason, I kept thinking about them, and so this book came recommended. I started reading it, and it actually broke down the mechanism by which we occupy in our mind and kind of create grievances. And basically something happens that you take offense and you take it personally, and then you blame a person for that thing that happened, and then you create a story, and that story is inside your head for as long as you allow it to be. And so at some point it just got to be a little too much for me. I was like, I actually don't want to. It wasn't productive. It wasn't constructive. I wasn't doing anything. I was just like keep going over and over about things that, frankly, shouldn't be relevant anymore. Right? It's been such a long time. And so for me, it's kind of a choice, right? Forgiveness is a choice, and it's also something that you don't have to do, because it has its own timeline, it has its own readiness process. But back then, after I read that book, I made a conscious decision that I'm just going to let those things that were bothering me, and this was before the accident, I'm going to let them go. I'm going to reach out to the people that I held that grievance over and actually apologize. And for the longest time, traditionally you think about, well, why should I forgive if the person doesn't apologize, or why should I? That was a big question for me. And my realization was that forgiveness at the end of the day is kind of a selfish thing. You do it for yourself. And once I got there, it became very clear what I needed to do.
And did you get the book yourself, or did somebody recommend the book to you, or how did that process happen? Because you said that you start having these realizations that there were some things mentally that were weighing you down. How did that happen? Did you get into it yourself, or?
Yeah, no, it came recommended. I actually went out and saw a therapist about some of the issues I was facing, and she recommended the book, and I read it, and I was like, this is really helpful. And it did actually turn things around. I felt like I shed all this weight, as I said, because you just kind of like, and I no longer think about this, right? And that was a big thing for me.
And you were saying as well, which I think is really, really powerful, that you decided maybe to reach out to some people as well and to apologize on your own terms. Was that, I don't know if you remember, I don't know how long that ago is now, but probably 3.5, 4 years. Was that always met with with a lot of love, or did some people not want to talk to you, or how were the reactions from people on your apology?
So one person in particular that I reached out to was my brother, who I haven't spoken to for a while, for a few years. We had a falling out, and he was like, yeah, let's reconnect. I mean, I said I'd love to reconnect if you're open to it, and he was, and it was good because our kids got to. He had young children. I had Gitel was like 2.5, 3 at the time, so our kids got to meet. So it was a good timing, obviously, given what happened a short few months later. But yeah, it was welcome. I think it was, people were surprised because nobody expected me to do it, because I don't think this was something that was in nature for me, because I grew up being quite I wouldn't say vengeful person, but a person that was very righteous. And so for me, it was very important that people followed whatever values I had. But it felt good. I mean, the minute I decided to do it, it was easy, and the reaction was easy, and it felt good.
And did you expect a reaction? I think this is really important as well when we're talking about forgiveness, because you could easily say, okay, now you make this big step of deciding that you're going to apologize to somebody, but maybe that other person is not ready to forgive and to go down that path. Did you have any expectations towards like the reactions of the people that you were reaching out to?
No, I did it for me, right? So I was very clear why I'm doing it, right? Because for the longest time I was like, my mother was encouraging me to reach out, and I always would say, why would I just didn't see why I would. And so my objective was very clear. I did it so that I let it go. Right. I was perfectly fine with whatever outcome, right? If it was a no, fine. If we are reconnecting, great. It was me sort of releasing that whatever baggage that we had, it's over with, right? And that was fully within my control, which was, you don't need anything else to happen for that release to happen.
Okay.
In my case, we ended up reconciling, but that wasn't the goal.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's really important to mention, because it shouldn't be about like that other person accepting your apology. It's really about releasing your own weight and your own emotions that you're maybe tying to certain situations or experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I had another question, and I'm just trying to think what it was. So we were talking about, like, obviously that it is really important to forgive. And I always say forgiveness is a stress management tool, because when we're talking about stress management, we're talking about mental health. And when we're having a lot of negative thoughts around situations that have happened to us in the past, and we are staying connected to those, it puts a lot of weight on us that we're carrying around with ourselves. And one of the other things that I think is so fascinating is that we also project sometimes maybe those experiences, or maybe find a characteristic in another person that maybe subconsciously sometimes reminds us of somebody that we are connecting with, and that we're projecting kind of that anger or that frustration or whatever that feeling is that we have actually with another person onto another person. Is that something that you experienced as well, or?
Give me. I can't think of.
I'm giving you the easiest example.
Yeah.
So I've been practicing a lot of forgiveness in my life as well. And for me, it's been a lot around my family, because my parents were very, they had a lot of fights when I was growing up. And so I used to I always say, like, I knew my parents just having fights with each other constantly. That's
Yeah.
kind of the atmosphere that I grew up in. And then that was kind of that one thing that I feel like I'm still forgiving. Like, there's still parts, maybe that I'm holding on to subconsciously, even though maybe I don't want to. But then also I had a couple of relationships with partners where I was cheated on. So then going into the next relationship, even though, you don't want to, and people say you should like have a fresh start, obviously you're projecting fears into something new. And so I think it's really important to practice forgiveness in order to really let that go and not bring kind of the baggage into a next. It can be a relationship, it can also be just a connection with a friend, or it could even be a relationship with a colleague, where you might be hanging on to fears and projections or expectations that have nothing to do with that actual person.
So first of all, thank you for sharing, and it does help clarify. Absolutely, the baggage that I have growing up, which we all accumulate over time, and without necessarily being conscious of what it actually means for who you become, right? At some point, you get older, and you're like, why am I the way I am? And so I can say I think I'm still on this journey, and I probably will be, of self-discovery. But one thing that I sort of came to realize about myself is that I had a hard time trusting people for a long time, and that was because I think it was because I was growing up Jewish in Ukraine and had a lot of people, like classmates, that would not be kind to me, sometimes bully me, sometimes I would get into physical fights and things like that. And so I always were on the lookout, right? And to your point, it has nothing to do with the person in front of you. Years later, it's sort of how you're wired. And it does take work to, I think of it as software, to kind of uninstall some of these things, right? Or at least make them idle so that they're not misfiring over time. My dad died when I was 6. That was a huge influence on my life growing up without my father, right? Because I had to grow up fast, take on responsibility, but I probably became too risk averse because I wasn't as adventurous, because I had all this weight on my shoulders of having to make something out of myself when we got here. So those things do impact, and everyone has their own events or things that really put an imprint on your mind. And I'm a huge believer in looking back, and forgiveness has a role in that too. Kind of letting go, being kind to yourself, not being too hard, and saying like, okay, that was then. But it does take effort and time to process, right? And that's intention, because if you're just going forward and you're getting, it's very hard to be reflective that way.
Yeah. And so is there something from the book that like opened your eyes, or do you remember if there was like something specific around what they were talking about that really made you realize that it was super important to forgive and to let go? Or were there any tools that they were talking about? Or
it's written by a professor that did some work in Ireland, reconciling families from Northern Ireland and Ireland. And these are families that lost children during the war, right? So they had really good reasons to hate one another, right? And his point was, if I could get those two sides to forgive one another on something as personal as, your child killed my child, or vice versa, there's hope for you too. And what I liked about that book is that he broke down the mechanism of forgiveness in 3 steps. One is taking it personally, the other one is blaming the other person for how you feel, and the third one is telling the story. And so for me, when you have that process and kind of resonated, you can break the cycle every step of the way, right? You could actually work to have fewer reasons to forgive, because you're not creating grievances where you don't have to. Or you can stop telling yourself stories, right? You can break it towards the end. So that was actually a very helpful kind of like process to internalize. And he actually does have a method, and I think there's an abbreviation for it. I believe it's HEAL, but has to do with breathing and meditation and asking yourself a series of questions. And over time, I like the word practice. Over time, this is something that people come to not right away, and some people never do. But over time, you get to that release, and as somebody who's forgiven and hopes to forgive more and more, it makes all the difference, because it allows you to move forward in a lighter way. You're just, I think of it as, you're carrying a backpack full of bricks, and it does nothing good for you. So.
Yeah. And I like as well that you are saying it's a process, because it's not like you set an intention to forgive somebody and then it's done, but it's, because our software has been wired for many years, that it also probably takes a couple of years to unwire that in your brain and tell yourself, okay, this is in the past and I can only influence what's in the present and what I'm going to do in the future. And I also, there's this quote that basically says, the only prisoner that was really there was myself, because I held myself in prison, because I made myself the victim of the whole situation. And every time I pulled that past situation into the present moment, I made myself the victim again.
Yeah. And you want to be, I really like the framing around prisoner. You want to be the hero of your story, right? You want to act out of control and say, I'm choosing to do this. And it typically doesn't feel very good to be a victim, or to feel like you're like, things are being done to you and you have no control. And so, absolutely. And as you for me, as I understood how this works, I became very conscious about not creating complex situations that I then have to let go of. You almost preemptively say, well, this is not worth it. I'm just not gonna, don't take things as personally. Don't blame the other person. And so clearing the runway so that, okay, you're dealing with things in the past and you're very conscious about not creating future reasons to forgive. That was actually, as I reflect on what led me to this book, I woke up one day and went to work and basically played a big role in creating conflict at work over some project situation. And I kind of paused and I said, how am I going to, I didn't wake up to do this. I didn't wake up to create this conflict, but how am I gonna make things better if I can't even stop, can't even keep things the same. I just made things worse. And so that was a big thing. I was like, I need to do something. I need to really understand the way these things work so I don't create these grievances.
Yeah. And I like that you bring it into work as well, because we often do that because we're all human beings and we all have our personal stories, right? And so we bring that, obviously we have that, we're bringing that baggage to work as well. And there's the same, there's the same reflections. I was just looking up the quote. So it is, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. It's by Louis Midas. Yeah. I thought it's really cool.
And to do that, that's just you. I mean, that's the good news, right? You can do that. You as a person can do that. You actually don't need anyone else to help you, but it does take practice and you have to be ready. I mean, if you're not, it's, and, for me, it was the question why. To be ready, I needed to have a clear reason for why I need to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone is kind of different that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, if I may ask, how was the process over the last 3 years? So, you lost a child, and what's the process been forgiving that? Because that's yeah.
Yeah. So I'm still in my journey,
Mm-hmm.
but a couple of things that I continue to carry from the book and from my approach to forgiveness is, um, I have this notion of putting things in the vault, and basically it's it's something that's unresolved that you put somewhere safe, and every once in a while you visit it and you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, but on your terms, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not completely locked. You kind of and so there's a lot of things I think about. Some of them having to do with me, right? I'm Gitel's father, and I have a journey of forgiving myself for a lot of the things that you do as a parent, right? Um, and so for me, this concept of a vault where I could actually uh, function and then visit the hard stuff on my own time and my own space, that was huge, because I'm a fairly sequential person. So these thoughts in the past would consume me and would actually make me not present at home. I would just be thinking I'm physically there, but mentally I'm not there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And coming from that that kind of past, um, it was very important for me that my mind is, I stay present and I continue to be a father for Michael and a husband to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a mechanism that's worked for me. The important thing is to continue working on it, because the temptation is, okay, you just put it in the vault, you lock it, you never visit it again.
I just wanted to ask you.
Yeah, then it's just there. It's not you're
Like
not
it's
working through
unresolved.
it. But you also don't want to be in the vault all the time, because
Mm-hmm.
that could be hard, and you're not at least for me, it would be hard to stay present and do all the things I need to do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my approach. It works fairly well depending on the day, but with something as devastating as and horrific as child loss, it's going to take time. And so I don't 3 years is a long time, but it's also not a long time at all. And so I tell myself, can't rush it. It has its own timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get there when I get there, if I get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how has this changed you as a person?
It's very clear to me that it definitely changed me. Like, I'm a different person today. I think this whole idea of I've always been a mission, purpose-driven person, but that brought losing Gitel basically put the question of, why am I here, and what's the point, and what am I going to do with the rest of my life, front and center. And that's kind of a key question that I think about quite a lot. And a lot of things that used to be important stopped being important. And that was very clear. And so there's a shift in identity. You take on a new identity. You shed some of the identities that you carried with you. You kind of observe that things that used to excite you no longer excite you.
Do you have an example about, like you said, that there's just things that are suddenly becoming unimportant?
Yeah. I mean, the easiest example to give is money. It became very clear to me that working for a paycheck is not enough, right?
Mhm.
Like there's got to be something more. No matter how well compensated I am, that's not going to be what motivates me. And it used to be a very strong motivator for me before, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or power or career ladder, like all of that.
Mhm.
Basically, I recently started journaling, and I drew a y-axis and an x-axis. X-axis would be time, y-axis was basically money. And as I go through time, I reached 2019 this year, and I basically realized that I want a new y-axis. That y-axis no longer works for me, right?
Mhm.
So that's just one example. Another example is uh, very deliberate about how I spend time. I no longer want to spend time on things that are sort of not that interesting or important, or spend time with people that I don't find connection with.
Mhm.
A lot of social norms that I used to follow, I no longer follow.
Mhm.
Um, so it is a quiet. I think it's quite a bit of a transformation. I haven't fully sort of internalized all the ways I've changed,
Mhm.
but I definitely feel that um, I'm no longer the person I was in 2016.
Mhm.
Not even close. And so, part of me feels that what I always had inside of me is just getting amplified. There was like a layer that was stripped, and now like I had it, and like all the things, all my core values are getting front and center. I think that's probably what's happening.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but yeah, it is different,
Mhm.
and you just have to. I had to accept it because being type A ambitious person, I was like, I no longer find that you know the things that used to motivate me all that motivating anymore. What am I going to do now?
Mhm.
Right. So it's a question I continue to ponder, but the change is there.
Mhm. Yeah. And what about your kids? So you had Michael, who's 10 now, and then you have Rose.
Yeah, we have Rose.
So how is that now with your kids? I'm sure there's a lot of fears, obviously, that are probably connected to all the things that happened. How are you trying to still be maybe not an overprotective father? Is that even possible after what happened? Or
Yeah, I do think about that a lot. So my wife uh, is overprotective, so I feel like she already does that job. So I have the luxury of
Mhm.
balancing her out a little bit. But look, as a human being, you are damaged in one of the most vulnerable ways, right? Your child dies, right?
Mhm.
Um, so the thought of it happening again uh, is just it gets to be too much, right? So that is always there.
Mhm.
At the same time, you don't want your living children to grow up in a bubble. You don't want them to be um, uh, impacted more than they already have been, right?
Mhm.
And Michael was in the car with Gitel, so he's already traumatized, and he's gonna have to go through his journey over time as well. So
Mhm.
for me, there's certain things that I do to protect myself, right? Um, as a human being would when you get hurt so badly, and that's okay. So because our nanny was driving the car, we don't have nannies, right? So
Mhm.
uh, I typically drive
Mhm.
my kids to school. Michael bikes, and we're very careful about who gets to drive them. Now, I also realize that doesn't actually do that much, because anything can happen. Okay, so you're driving, but life is unpredictable, and
Yeah.
so it's one way where I'm like, I can't have that happen again. But I allow him to ride his bike, right? And you know that's a risk we take. But he he loves it, and it's a social experience for him with his friends. And you know, at the end of the day, the only thing you can do as a parent, or the most important thing you can do as a parent, is to create a loving environment for your child.
Mm.
And I think we're doing a pretty good job doing that, just making sure he feels safe, he feels loved. And then you just you hope, fully realizing that we live in a fragile world, and nothing is guaranteed. So it's every day is we're trying to balance those instincts. Obviously, we all want to protect, right? But Michael, Rose is little, so it's not relevant yet for her. But for Michael, he's a little man now, and I want him to go and explore the world and live a full life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What are you most grateful for in your life?
I think it comes to our ability to create a loving environment inside our immediate family. I think feeling loved and being loved is probably the most important thing a human being can experience. For me, going back, everything good I have inside of me comes from those people that love me growing up. And so I feel my kids are growing up in a healthy, good environment. We have our fights and this and that, but overall, I think the environment and the family dynamic that we've created is a good one, and I'm very grateful for that, because I don't take it for granted.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm actually curious. I usually ask the question if you have 3 wisdoms or guidelines or rules that you live by, and I'm curious actually if that really changed in the last 3 years. From maybe what would have it's hard to ask this question now, but I wonder what would have that been maybe 3 years prior, and then what would they be now for you, or were they always the same?
Yeah, I think they definitely changed, because the 3 kind of guiding principles I've sort of come to them after. I don't know what I would have said if you asked me this question 3 years ago. I'd have to think about that. But I think the big ones for me, and with a caveat that I haven't mastered them, right? This is still work in progress. Being kind to yourself is a big one. We live in a tough world. There's a lot of people, plenty of people are not going to give that to you, the kindness. And so you got to be your own friend. You don't have to, but that makes life a lot harder.
Or easier
I think
to do it if you're kind to yourself, right?
Was that?
Or it makes it easier if you're kind to yourself,
Yeah,
and you're
it
not
does.
expecting it to come from the external world.
It does. It does make it easier for, and I used to be terrible with that. I used to expect things of myself that were frankly unreasonable. And then I would be very mean to myself for not achieving them, and fast enough, all that kind of stuff. And so that was a big transformation, and made my path a bit easier, which is what you want. I think the second one is slowing down. There's just so many beautiful things around us that are right there, and we don't notice, because we're running too fast. And so I think that's something I've been trying. It's hard. It's very hard. I've never done it before. But noticing things around you, and noticing how beautiful your surroundings are, that's a big one. And that kind of clears your mind too. I think the third one is I've prioritized human connection over many other things, because human connection, I think, is one thing that always works. And, going on a walk with a friend, somebody, your safe people you feel close to, people that you feel open with. Spending time with people like that is energizing, and just gives you energy, to replenishes you, I would say, because there's a lot of things that are going to drain you in life. And so the key question I have, okay, what are some of the things, like coping tools, that gives you energy? And for me, human connection is at the top of the list. And I actually I started creating those spaces for myself by, I never did that before. I would actually pick up the phone and call or text and say, hey, let's go hang out. And that's been helpful.
And I love that you said it's a work in progress, because we always optimize, and we have every day the chance to do better, right? Or to practice again what we are believing in and the values that we have.
Sometimes you lose sight of it. You lose sight of your coping tools, and then you kind of like regroup and go back to it. And, sometimes you feel like you've learned a lesson, and then you forget the lesson. You're like, okay, I'm starting from scratch. But that happens. Yes, I think work in progress is a good caveat, because it keeps you. It's part of, actually goes back to self-kindness. You don't consider yourself an expert,
Yeah. And forgiveness as well. Everything is a work in progress, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Is there a book besides the one that we already talked about that has been kind of your maybe guiding star, or that you've been reading multiple times over because you find it so relatable?
Let me try to pick one. For me, the book that really helped was, it's called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's not, I thought it was Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's When Bad Things Happen. It's written by a rabbi, Harold Kushner, I think is his last name. And he talks about, the randomness of life. And because one thing that I struggled with was, when something terrible happens, you go to two places. You either blame yourself, I must have done something wrong to deserve it. And I went there. Or, you start, depending on your degree of religiosity, you start getting into the narrative of God's plan. It's meant to be. And he was a rabbi. The author is a rabbi, so he has obviously religious expertise. So, and that's not a very kind way to think about it, because you want whoever you lost, you want them next to you. You don't want them to be wherever they are, right? And you don't want to think that somebody decided that they're gone now. At least that wasn't comforting for me. And so he talks about randomness of life, and how we have a choice on what to do when things happen, but the question of why things happen the way they happen is kind of an unanswerable question. And that's one thing that I've decided for myself. I worked so hard to kind of figure out why, and then I said, I'd rather not have an answer than have answers that are offered. And I kind of left it there. And so you live without an answer, but that's better for me, at least, than have answers that are offered. I never found comfort in those.
And that's so powerful. I'm just thinking that you unfortunately cannot always choose what happens to you, but you can choose how you react to it, right? That's your only power that you have. That's your the area of power that you have, right? And I talk about that as a stress management tool, actually, as well, of like, 10% is what life happens or gives you, and then 90% is what you make out of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really powerful to think about it that way, and to always remind ourselves constantly that not everything is great and fair and rainbows and butterflies what happens to us, but we can choose what we make out of it. We can choose to continue to live or to make ourselves miserable for the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's, one thing that I've been practicing is just whatever emotions you feel, let it flow, right? And so, um, as a human being, you're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling, and there's going to be times for decisions. There's going to be times for making, logical choices, and there's going to be times for just pain and suffering and grief. And it doesn't feel like you're choosing that. I think that feels like it's just flowing through you, and that's okay. But over time, you do get longer periods of time where you get to make choices, and those choices aren't like, one thing I'll share, like, it was a choice that we made to not sue anyone. We had plenty of lawyers that were telling us, you can sue this company and this and this, and we said, this is not how we're going to spend our time, because that would consume me. The lawsuit would consume me, and knowing myself, I wouldn't be able to be a parent. So that's a choice that I made and my wife made, that I think was an important choice, because it kind of, everything would have been different had we taken the other fork of that decision.
Of course. So. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Has it been last question? I'm really curious about that, actually. I mean, you are a man, so, kind of dealing with those kind of emotions and feelings. How has that been for you? Have I think you said as well that before the accident, you were a little bit of a different person, and it was a big transformation for you. But how do you deal with maybe being more in touch with your own emotions? Has that been hard for you? Like, do you think it's been powerful for you to actually go through that process?
I think I've always been fairly in tune. I may not have always acted on it or been smart about what I do about it, but I've always been in tune with what I'm feeling, and sharing and kind of talking about things. I think part of it had to do with being, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and my grandmother would share a lot of things with me, and I would share a lot of things with her. So I found this power of sharing and confiding and being somebody's confidant very important. But yeah, I think you're right to call out that men, and I don't mean to generalize, but there are actually a lot of studies around loneliness and keeping things inside and not sharing. And there's an expectation, societal expectation, and that adds weight to men, because they're human beings too, obviously, and they have problems. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of my time thinking about is how do we break through that? I mentioned human connection, and sharing, and there's this shared experience that you're not alone in dealing with some of the hardest things, but sometimes it feels very lonely, right? And so breaking through that is important. And I think, because I think gender is a spectrum, I think I've always kind of been I don't know if I'm in the middle, but I've always been sort of very comfortable with sharing my emotions and speaking my truth. And I like that about myself. That's a good thing.
It is, for sure. Filipp, thank you so much for this honest podcast interview. I'm really happy that I had you, and I'm really grateful that you shared this. I know that it's probably not easy to talk about, and yeah, I'm really grateful that you shared your story with us. And hopefully some people that are listening to this will find comfort in what we talked about today.
Julia, thank you so much for having me, and it's been an absolute pleasure.